Alright, let's create a ring in Blender. I decided to make this a beginner-friendly tutorial. So in the bottom here, you can see the keys I'm pressing. So if I'm pressing V, W, you will see them down there. And okay, so press A and then delete to delete everything. And then we will create a circle. And to move around, you press mouse scroll wheel to move around like this. And hold shift and mouse scroll wheel to move like this. Okay. And we scroll in with the mouse wheel. And now we press tab to go into edit mode. And you see it's selected to the vertices. We can press this one for edges and faces, but we don't have any faces yet, so we will press this. And then we will press A to select everyone. Then E plus Z to move them up. And we can make them like this. We want to create a ring, so we want a ring form. Okay, now we can select this and we can press A and then E and then S to scale in. And you see it slopes down a little bit here, so what we can do is we can scale it up on Z. So press S then Z. There are probably a bit better way of doing this, but this is how I do it. Okay, so now we have this. We want to add an modifier, and we want this subdivision surface modifier. And you see now it gets this rounded edges, and this now it looks very blocky. And two things we can do: we can turn up the levels to make it more smooth, but you still see some squares in here. So what we do is we press tab, or we can press up here and choose either edit mode or object mode. So we are in object mode right now, and we right click on the material or the object, sorry, and then we shade auto smooth. We can also shade smooth, but then you see the edges here, they are now very smooth. But if we shade auto smooth, we have a sharp edge. So if the edge is sharp, then it will shade differently. Okay, we can also add this one more time. So now you see it's smooth again, because the edge here is very, like, I don't know how to say it, but it's very sharp. And if we do this, it smoothes out the edge. Okay, I will keep this at 2, and I will keep the render at 3. Say let's have it at 3. Okay, and to make it super easy now, we will go into this shader material view here, and this looks a bit different from you guys. You don't have this. This is an add-on I have, but we want to create a new material, and it takes a little bit time now. And in here we can change the color, and we will change it to something a bit yellow, because I want this to be like a gold ring. But we see here it's not happening anything. We cannot see any color, and that's because we're in the viewport shading, but we want to be in this viewport shading. Now we can see some sort of a color, and to make it look even better from this, we can go into this shading viewport, and now it will start looking a bit weird. So we have to go into this render, and now we are in Eevee, and the Eevee is very simple. It's hard to get things to look realistic, so we will go into cycles. Now cycles can make your computer slower, and if you're on a laptop like me, being in this cycles viewport is not something I recommend, especially if you're modeling, but we need this to see how our render will look like. Okay, so I changed this CPU to GPU compute, and if you don't see this, go into the preferences and then system, and then in this render or the render devices we have CUDA, optics, and if you cannot use optics, choose CUDA or HIP or whatever. Okay, but in here, if your graphics card is like this, not enabled, you will see it's grayed out here. So if we check our GPU, we can see it's there. And it might happen your computer doesn't have a GPU, that's fine, but then you can just render on the CPU. Okay, we'll close that one. And now we still don't see any color, so, or no light, we don't have any lights in the scene. So what we'll do is we will press Shift plus A at the same time, and we will get this menu again. And we want to add a light. We can add a spotlight, and then we can press G plus Z and move them up. And now we have some sort of light. We can see some changes here in the light, but it's still not looking good. So we will add a plane, Shift A again, Mesh, Plane, and we will scale this up. So now it looks a little bit better. But we will select this spotlight again, go into this data here, and we can turn up this. Now it looks okay, not good, but okay. So we will select the circle again, and we will go down to this metal here, and we will turn this up. And we can see now the reflection gets more of a metallic look, but it's not as reflective as we want it to. So we turn down this roughness. And we can turn down this roughness to 0 or above 0. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that if you have it on 0, it's like a mirror, but if you have it on some like value here, you have that sort of roughness to make it look realistic. Okay, but we're still missing something, and that is because the reflections in here are very they're not in detail, because we don't have anything in the scene that can bounce on this reflection. And the best thing to do to solve that issue is to add an HDRI. And if you don't know what an HDRI is, it's a environment, a sky dome or skybox. So we will go into this shader editor, and in here we can press up here and then world. And in here we can scroll our mouse wheel. And now, before we do anything, go into the preferences, then add-ons, search for Node Wrangler and select this, because this is very helpful. Okay, so now when we have the Node Wrangler, we can select this background here, and we can press Ctrl plus T. And now it makes this for us, so we don't have to search for these maps ourselves. But if you want to search for them by yourself, you can press Shift A and search for them here, but that's not necessary. And you will see here in the environment we can open and search for our HDRI. But how do you get an HDRI? Well, there are some sites on the internet, I will go through that, but before that, you will see now immediately we have this sort of reflection, which makes it looks realistic. And also, if we want to, we can now unselect this by pressing this little eye. It's still visible in render, so we can unselect that also. But now already it looks much better. It looks like something realistic, sort of. But how do we get the HDRI? Well, we can go into Polyheaven. We can go into this Polyheaven and we can search for, oh, here, HDRI, sorry. And then we can choose whatever we want in here. And let's say you want this indoor scene. You can go in here and select the resolution. And be very careful, don't take higher than 8K if you have a medium computer, because if I have 16K on my computer, my software crashes. So 8K is enough, 4K is also enough for this purpose. We can even choose 2K, but have the highest 8K, and then you download it, and then you will get the zip file, and then with the zip file you can then unpack it, and in there is your environment texture or HDRI. Well, I will not go through that steps because I think the majority of you who are watching this know already how to do that. Okay. In here then, we still are missing something. We cannot render this. If we hit render up here, it's not gonna work. It says error. There's no camera found in the scene. And that explains everything. So we press Shift A again, and then we'd add a camera. And now the camera is in front of us. So what we can do is press Control, Alt, and 0 on the numpad. If you don't have a numpad, we can press View, Align Active Camera to View. You see it here, Control Alt numpad 0. And this is very helpful because then you don't have to go into the camera and move around in here, all locations. It just takes some time. So having this numpad is very simple. And we can hit render now and get a rendered image, but we need to go through some render settings before we do that. Okay. And you don't have to know exactly what everything of this does, but it's simple. If in here we have the viewport, everything under the viewport here will only be visible in the viewport. And here in the render, it's only visible in the render. So if we want the same sort of look in our viewport than our render, then we have to match these settings so they are the same. What we can begin with is add denoise, and this denoiser will remove all the little black spots we can see here. There are a bunch of them, so they will remove those dots. Now it looks much better. But here also in the viewport, to make it easier for our computer, we can press here, we can make that to 1, because it's not necessary to make our viewport slow just because we want good quality. So we can keep this at this value, and I will set the time limit on 10 seconds. We can move this up further as we go, but that's a good way to start. So what that means is when it starts to render, every tile, we will go more into the tile thing later, but it takes 10 seconds for each tile, so that's quite good to remember. And in the light path also, in the light paths, it will decide how many light bounces there will be for each of them. So we don't have anything that's transparent, so we can remove that. And we don't have anything that's any volume like water, so we can keep it at 0. Transmission, we don't have anything that's transparent. And glossy we have, because this reflections thing is the glossy part, so we can turn this up to 8. And diffuse, we can turn it up to 8 also. And diffuse will make the rough area or surfaces more crispy. You can test this value out by yourself, but it's quite helpful to change these. They will not make a big difference, but it's unnecessary to have a lot of bounces on the transmission part when we don't have anything that's transmission. And one thing I want to add to is, and one thing that we want to add to is the color management. As the default it says standard, but we want filmic, and you now saw it became a little bit like grayer, or a gray like look to it. But here we can add contrast, so we can make it very high contrast, we can make it high contrast, and we can make it very low contrast. But I think high contrast looks good for this scene. And also, if you want to go even further into if you want to go further into how the light behaves, we can change this value. So we can move this up a little bit or down depending on what you like, and then we can move this up also a little bit. And now we can see the light looks much different, and we have more contrast. If you take this like far, it looks horrible, but if you keep it like close to the middle here, it looks alright. Okay. We can also go under this performance tab. Now this tiling. This is what I talked before. Now 2048 is the whole render. So if we hit render, for example, I will save. It's very important to save his, and how you save is Control S. Control S and it will save. Okay, but now when we hit render, you will see the whole screen renders. And that's because of the tiling, because now the tiling is the whole screen, so it's 2048, and we can change this to like half of it, like 1024. We can just select this and type it like that, or you can type it manually, it doesn't matter. I will also select this one to use spatial splits, and I will unselect this one. And the reason I use spatial splits is if it's complicated like render, I think when it's a lot of like long light bounces, like a reflection, at least from my computer, it takes a lot of time to calculate that. So I use spatial splits, because as it says, it's take longer build time, because it's take longer to like calculate before it starts rendering, but it's much faster render. So I usually put that there. And then this use curve BVH, it uses more ROM for faster renders, but I have like a medium CPU, so I think like it's bottlenecking when I'm using that. Okay. And now when we have this 1024 and we hit render again, we can see it will render the half of the image. And now, because we have a 10-second like time limit, each tile will take 10 seconds. So this one takes 10 seconds, this one takes 10 seconds, and then we have two up here that also takes 10 seconds. So if you have a time limit on 10 seconds and you have a different tiling than default, it won't show up as the time you put into the what do you say, like here in this tab. If you put 10 seconds here, but if you go into this and we can see it took 33 seconds, it's because it's 10 seconds for each tile. And each tile also takes less and more time to render, because up here these two takes much faster because there's nothing to calculate really. It's only some light and some white things. Alright, and now we have a ring. It looks okay. It doesn't look good for like a professional view, but it's still okay. So if you want to continue to make it look even better, because we can do a lot of things in the view to make it like look more realistic, we can add more rings, we can add reflection in the plane under, and that's one thing I want to do, is add a shader to the plane under here. So we can press this one and new. And for some reason, I don't know, when I press this plus button and new, it goes much faster for this to pop up. But in here, we can do the same thing. We can turn down the roughness. And now already we see it's reflectioned here, or it reflects the HDRI we have in the background. Same in the ring, it also reflects light from the HDRI. And if you change object, we have this one. So what we can do now is we can add a bump node to the normal. So in here, the normal, we can hold left click and drag it out, and then we get this window here, and we can search for bump normal. And I won't go into detail what this does, but if we drag this height here also, we can add a color ramp. No, actually, noise texture, like that. And now it looks much more interesting. You can see it's like wavy here, and it sort of look like plastic almost, or some leather. And what we can do is we can change the color. We can change it to like black. Now it looks like some sort of oil, I don't know. But if we change this metallic, it will calculate this as metallic, and we can turn off the roughness a little bit. Like, this is all just playing around. You can do this as you like, but I want to keep this like a metallic look, but it's like a bit grayed. It's not fully white. Something like this. Now it looks quite interesting to look at least. Okay, so now we have this sort of wavy look in the material, and we can hit render again if you want to. And now it's all like playing around. If you feel like you want to achieve more, I will show you some things that can make it more interesting. But if you think that this is enough, then that's alright. But okay, so now we have something that looks even better from before. And one thing I forgot to mention was up here we have this slot 1. And what it will do is we can have like many different renders, and we can render them in different slots. So now we have rendered an image in slot 1, and if we change to slot 2 and we close this and render another render, we will then have a render in slot 2. So we can go back to the slot 1 and see what the difference made. So in here also, now I want to move this down a little bit also. So G said move this down like that. And then to make it like more interesting to look at, we can press Shift D and move it up in Z axis. And here also I want to make this a different material. So what we can do is we can press this new material, and it will copy the material we already had. So here's the material 1, material 2. In here we can also change this to gold. That's the first material here. And if we have this new material, we can change this to silver. And we can then make this the middle here, like that. So now it looks like silver, and then we can press G, X to move the X axis, and then we can press R to rotate it, and then in Y axis. So we press R, then Y, and we can move it like this, and then we press G, Z again. And to make them fit like normal, like you see here, it's clipping here and here. There are some add-ons you can add, but for this simple thing, we want to just like this. It doesn't have to be super perfect. I mean, It's just a test render, but I like when it's perfect, so like that something, I don't know. And then we press numpad 0 and we get to this viewport again, or this camera look. And now we can see we have 2 rings, and 1 gold ring and 1 silver ring. And this is where I'm about to end this. So I hope you like this sort of content. If you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss on any future updates. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.